Today, I'll be teaching you pretty much everything I know about sound designing in a wavetable synth. Wavetable synths are definitely the most widespread digital synths out there, and these include synths like Serum, Vital, and Massive. I'll be using Vital today because I think it's the most user-friendly, and it's free as well. This guide should be accessible to pretty much anyone watching, even to those producers that are in the earliest stages of their production journey. But I'm not going to waste more time, let's hop straight into it. First of all, I just want to say that sound designing is not about making the most complex sound out there. You'll see if you watch my videos on a regular or listen to some of my music maybe, that the sounds I make aren't that complex at all really. I prefer simple and textured sounds with more focus on the songwriting itself. If making complex sounds is your goal, however, then by all means do that. I just wanted to say that being good at sound design is just being able to make whatever sound that you're visioning inside your head, not who can make the craziest dubstep wub. So wavetable synths are pretty much identical. I think the majority of people use Serum, and I used to use Serum as well, but the things Vital and Serum can do are pretty much the exact same. The UI is just a little bit different. So everything I mentioned today will also be applicable if you're using Serum. But let's go through each part of the plugin bit by bit. First of all, we've got the oscillators. Each oscillator is just a waveform playing at a specific loudness, and that waveform is decided by the wavetable. The wavetable is chosen here. The basic shapes are the sine wave, and this is just a sine wave with some harmonics, the triangle wave, the saw wave, the square wave, and the pulse wave. When I sound design, I tend to just use the basic shapes, and then I use some effects or filters or things like this, which I'm also going to teach you, to kind of mess with the sound and make it sound different. But this is a sine, this is a triangle, saw, square, pulse. Basically, what makes these sounds different is the fact that they have different harmonics playing on the top. If I play a C, we can all hear that they're playing the exact same note and the exact same tone, but yet they still sound different. That's because they have the same root frequency, which is the C, but they have loads of different harmonics on top. Now, these are the basic shapes, but there are loads of other different waveforms, which look like this, for example, or like this, or like this. And these kinds of wavetables have some different characteristics to them. Again, this is the same thing with the basic shapes, that they're playing the same root note, but have different harmonics on top. This is what we call timbre on instruments, for example, as well, where the piano and the guitar sound different even though they may be playing the exact same notes. Also, I just want to mention that when it comes to sound designing, what I do and what I think is the best approach is pretty much always to experiment. I don't want this guide to be something that tells you exactly how to sound design each and every time, and that way you can experiment and try new things while still actually understanding what's going on in the plugin. I always experiment when sound designing, and I really think it's the only way to actually achieve new and cool sounds. Because you're never going to create something unique and new if you've already done it before. You know what I mean? Anyway, you can go back to the saw wave and choose something like this. In Vital, there are 3 oscillators, meaning that you can have 3 different waveforms playing on top of each other. This is the pitch section for each of the oscillators. If I pitch this up 12, this will be playing the C that is an octave higher. So these oscillators are pretty much doing their own thing each, but they're playing on top of each other. That way I can choose another wavetable, like this random thing, and maybe I'll do +7 here. And create something totally weird. We also got the sampler, which means that you can also play a sample on top. I like to use the white noise a lot. It creates a cool texture on top of sounds. You can see it fills out the high end and gives the saw wave some texture. But you can mess around with stock sounds like this. Or you can import your own sounds and samples to mess around with. On all of these oscillators, you have the ability to add what's called unison as well. And what that does is to add width and detuning to the sound. And what do I mean? Well, let me show you. So what's happening here is basically that the signal is being split into 16 different voices, which means that this wave is pretty much being played 16 different times. So over here you can decide how many voices you want, and over here you can decide how much you want those voices to be detuned from each other. So I can mess with both and you can hear what difference it makes. If I put this at 15% and then we start with the voices. So if you want to make some siren sounds, you know how to do that now. Next, we got the morphing. Morphing is essentially just changing or morphing the wave that we've chosen. So if we have a saw wave, but we want to change that a little bit, we can use the spectral morph or the wave morph. Here and here we can decide how we want to morph it, and we can turn it up and down over here. Sometimes I just like to mess with these parameters and see if something sounds cool. For example, we got a vocoder here, bending. We can try some spectral time skew. And we end up with some completely new waves. So that's pretty much all there is to the fundamental aspect of the sound. Everything else from here is just changing characteristics from this fundamental sound. So next we got the envelope. And the envelope is essentially just deciding the volume over time. So if I play the saw wave here, I can now make a volume envelope that looks like this. So this is a very plucky sound because everything is pretty short. The attack, the decay, sustain, and release are all pretty short. But I could make some sound like this where it's kind of swelling. And you can use these points to kind of draw in how you want the sound to sound, but you can also mess with these knobs. The attack pretty much decides how long it takes from when you press the note till it reaches the top maximum volume. So if the attack is very short, then as soon as you press the note, it will reach maximum volume. But if the attack is very long, it will take quite some time from when you press the note till it reaches the maximum volume. Versus I never actually use hold and delay. I think they're pretty useless features, but I'll go over them anyway. Delay is pretty much how long you have to wait from when you press the note until the sound starts to begin. So if the delay is over here, but the attack is here, then the delay will be this amount of time before the sound actually begins. Hold is basically how long after it's hit maximum volume that it stays for maximum volume, but I don't really use this ever. Decay is pretty much how long the sound plays for if you hold the note down all the way. So for example, if we have the decay set to here at around 2 seconds, and I press the C note on my keyboard and hold it down all the way, then this will stop at around 2 seconds, even though I continue holding it. But if I let go before this point, it will jump from here to the point where the release is. And what I mean, you can see it on the graph here. When I let go over here, it jumps down here. Sustain is basically deciding how much your sound is decaying. So where decay is actually the amount of time it takes to decay, sustain is the amount at which that decays. So if your decay is at 1 second and sustain is at 1, the sound won't actually decay over those 1 second. But if you turn your sustain down to 0, the sound will decay at 100% over that 1 second. Let's turn up the sustain here and have some release as well. Now, if I play a note and let go over here, you'll see that it jumps over here. What the release does is add some sound after I let go. See, I let go over here, and then it jumps over here. If I turn the release all the way down, the sound will just stop very abruptly. Sounds horrible. The release just gives it time to fade out once you let go. Next, we'll show the filters. Now, if I go over to the Advanced tab pretty fast, you can see the frequency spectrum when I play this sound. What the filter can do is cut out or add in some of these frequencies. So for example, the standard filter is the low pass, like this one. You can see we're cutting out the highs here, but you can also see it in the sound itself, that everything here is being shaved off. But what you can also do is have this changing over time. And you can do this by modulating the envelope to the filter. So if we turn this down a bit to like 50, you can see that when I press it, this moves up and down, and the filter just follows the movement of the envelope. So if I make the filter look like this instead, so there's a fast attack, which means it goes up very fast, then it falls kind of slowly due to the decay and sustain, and then it falls pretty fast with the release. And you can see that as well with this filter. You can see that it goes up very fast, then falls slightly, and then falls again. And you can mess around with different filter types as well. When I modulate, I don't really think about what I'm doing all the time. The intention is just to create some movement in the sound. So if you can see here, I can just do some random things here. We can add another filter, just make sure it's going to the oscillator 1. And then let's choose a comb filter, which has this weird curve. And let's modulate that too. Let's maybe turn off this unison. So we started with a basic shapes and we haven't even touched the effects, and it sounds like this. Sounds pretty crazy. If I disconnect this from all of them, it'll still sound weird, but not in the same way. It doesn't have that same characteristic to it because there's no movement. You can also choose to send these filters to individual oscillators. So for example, I can use this Combs filter maybe only on the sampler. Let's have a white noise. And if we turn the key tracking up, so the filter is affecting the sample, but not this oscillator. And then we can use this only for the oscillator 1. So here the level decides the loudness of each oscillator. So let me turn this up and maybe this one down a bit. I can also give this some attack, so it gives it like a wobbly effect. And maybe make this shorter. And turn up the release. So this is a really weird sound, and we haven't even done too much inside the plugin. It's some basic wavetables, we have a basic saw wave, and some white noise, and we are just using an envelope and some filters. So next we got the LFO. LFO stands for low frequency oscillation. This is a very low frequency sound that humans can't actually hear, and we can use this to modulate other sounds without hearing this sound itself. So we made this random wave in the LFO. We can map this to any parameter in the synth and create some movement like we did with the envelope. So if I put this on the level just to show you, let's put the frequency to 1/4 and turn up this so we can actually hear it over time, and also this. We can also add another one here. So only messing with the things that I've already explained, we've made this sound. We got 3 oscillators, one at the root note at 0, one pitched up 7 semitones, and a noise sound. The oscillator 3 here is pitched up 7, but it's also got 8 voices of unison and a little bit of detune. All of the oscillator's volumes are modulated by this LFO, as you can see here. The envelope isn't actually doing anything here. And then we got these 2 filters, which is kind of creating the whole sound. We got the comb, which is affecting the noise, and this filter, which is affecting the first oscillator. Pretty cool so far. Alright guys, recording the second part of this video a bit later, but I'll continue where I left off. So, we've gone over the oscillators, the envelope, the LFO, and the filters. Now we got a few things left on this front page. First we got everything down here. First we got these randoms, and I like to use these a lot in my sound design sessions, because it can give some random, unexpected movements here and there. I especially like to map this to the fine-tuning of some oscillators, because it gives a really weird pitchy sound. It gives a kind of detuned and analog sound, but the truth is you can map this to pretty much anything you want in the whole synth. You can map this to something on the filter, something on the envelope, something in the LFO, and it'll give a bit of random movement to that parameter. So next we got these things here. This is the polyphony, and it decides how many notes you can play at once in the same sound. So it's on 8 right now, so that means I could press down 8 notes on my keyboard and you would hear 8 notes. If I only had 1, I could only play 1 note at a time. So even if I hold down 2 notes, it'll only play the second note. This is just the pitch bend range, how many notes you want this to go in between if you're planning on doing some pitch bends over here. This is the velocity, and this is the width. So if this is at 0%, there's going to be 0 width, and it's going to be completely mono. I don't really ever touch these things, but it's probably good to know. Next, we got the portamento down here. The portamento is basically the pitch change between notes. So for example, if I play a C and then a G lower down, it's going to pitch up from the G to the C and pitch down from the C to the G. And you can adjust if you want the setting on at all or how much you want it to work. Next, we got the macros, and this is if you want to automate different parameters at the same time with the same button. Again, I don't ever use macros, but they're useful sometimes if you're making presets for other people and you want them to be able to tweak them easily, or if you're playing live and you want to be able to tweak loads of different parameters at the same time. But let's move over to the effects. I don't want to spend too much time on the effects because most people already know what all these effects do. Chorus just gives it width. The compressor compresses it. You can do it in single band, multi-band, low-high. I usually just use multi-band and then turn the release all the way up, mess around a bit with the mix, and then turn the mids up. Delay gives delay. Distortion distorts. Different distortion types. You can do some downsampling as well. EQ if you want to shape the sound. I'd say only use this EQ inside the plugin if you really want to put the EQ before another effects. Otherwise, I'd always just put the EQ on afterwards down in the chain, like this. Just put an EQ on and then cut whatever you want, if you want some low mids out or whatever. Then we have another filter. I would not really use this filter if you haven't used these filters, because these filters are just easier to use, especially with deciding which oscillator to go through. But they're useful if you've used these filters and then put loads of effects on, and the effects of the filter aren't heard as much anymore. You can put a similar filter on. For example, I could use one of these, this comb thing or a formant, doesn't really matter, and then map this onto it, and then all the effects is going through this filter as well. If it was like this, however, all the effects would be after the filter. So it matters which order you put your effects in. You can just drag them up and down like this. We got a flanger and a phaser, which are both just messing with cuts in the frequency spectrum. And last, we got a reverb. I don't think this reverb is very good. It sounds very harsh and digital, just like the Serum one does as well. So my go-to is Valhalla Vintage Verb, but I understand that not everyone has Valhalla Vintage Verb. So it's not a bad reverb in the sense that if you don't have any other reverb, it's a good option. But I'd consider trying to find some other reverbs. There are probably also some free reverbs out there that are good. If I were to use this, I'd definitely cut out a lot of the high end, just so it doesn't sound that harsh. Next, I'll show you the matrix. The matrix is basically just the place where you can see all the modulations you've made in the synth. So as you saw earlier, I mapped the LFO to loads of different parameters, and I mapped this envelope to the filter in here. And you can see this stuff in the matrix and mess around with it in here as well. So I can actually turn down the level of the automation over here, and you'll be able to see it in the circle thing on the LFO one. And then we got the advanced tab, which I only ever use for 3 of the features in here. And that's the tuning here, it's the oversampling, and it's the analysis. Everything else in here, like the oscillator 1 options, oscillator 3 options, I don't think I've ever touched. If you really want to know what it does, I'm sure you can find some video out there that explains it in a short time. The tuning basically changes the tuning of the whole sound. And I like to mess with this if I'm making music in a different tuning. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, modern music is made in the standard tuning of 440 Hz. This is where the A below middle C is tuned to 440 Hz. But sometimes I like to make music in 432 Hz, where that same A is pitched to 432 Hz. And this has the effect that it sounds like it's in the same key, but it has a totally different feeling. So if I play a chord, that's in 440 Hz. If I pitch this around 32 cents down, it's going to be in around 432 Hz. You can find the tables online where it shows the different hertz and how much you need to pitch it down. You can hear it sounds like it's in the same key, but it has a different vibe to it. For the oversampling, I don't want to waste your time with the definition and explaining exactly what it does, but basically it's just that the higher oversampling rate, the higher quality sound you'll have. But the higher oversampling rate you have, the more it's going to work on your CPU. So if you have a computer that can't really handle a lot, stick to the lower oversampling rates. But if you have a beast of a computer, there's no reason not to use the higher ones. The analysis I just use once in a while to see the frequency spectrum. And that's all there was to the basics of sound designing in Vital. I didn't want to overcomplicate this and spend 10 hours breaking down the plugin. I just wanted to talk about what I think would actually benefit you and what you would actually use when using the plugin. For me, when it came to sound designing, the most important part was just experimenting. Because when you experiment, you learn what things create the sounds that you like. And more than just explaining what each of the things did, I hope I could also show you how you could create some cool sounds. I have more specific sound designing videos on my channel as well, where I create a specific kind of sound. So if you want to see those, I've linked the playlist in the top right. If you like to sound design your own sounds, but you also like to use some presets, then I do have a preset pack that I sell. It's called Spirit Volume 1, and it's in the top link in the description. I really hope you learned something from this video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next video.